Many people, upon encountering a chimpanzee, whether it's at a zoo or just on the screen, have felt an uncanny similarity between them and us. And this gut-level reaction has been substantiated by decades of research into their emotional and cognitive capabilities and into the close genetic relationship between our two species. And this research has been a major tool in the campaign of the Non-Human Rights Project, or NHRP, the goal of which, in the words of its founder, Stephen Wise, is to, quote, broadly change the status of non-human animals as things under the law without any rights to persons under the law who have the capacity to have rights, as reported by Karen Brouillard in the Washington Post, May 24th, 2016. This campaign has seen a victory of sorts recently. On May 3rd, 2016, David Grimm at Science reported that the New Iberia Research Center in Louisiana, or NIRC, announced its intentions to begin relocating the majority of its chimpanzees to a sanctuary in Blue Ridge, Georgia. Among these chimpanzees were Hercules and Leo, who have been the subjects of a court case filed on their behalf by the NHRP in 2013. Before describing this case in more depth, it would be prudent to examine more closely the goals of the NHRP. With this context in hand, I will return to the case of Hercules and Leo, after which I will discuss a few of the counter-arguments that have been leveled against the organization. The NHRP argues that animals will never truly have rights under the law unless they are considered as persons under the law. Specifically, the rights they are seeking for animals are those of bodily liberty and integrity, which translate essentially into the rights not to be imprisoned without just cause and not to be touched without one's consent. To clarify a legal person, Black's Law Dictionary in 2004 defined a person in part as, quote, a being, real or imaginary, who, for the purposes of legal reasoning, is treated more or less as a human being. So legal personhood is not necessarily to be equated with humanness, a distinction that informs the concept of corporate personhood here in the United States, and which allowed personhood of that sort to be granted to an orangutan by courts in Argentina, as reported by Rachel Feltman in the Washington Post, December 22nd, 2014. The NHRP has been hoping to achieve something similar with Hercules and Leo. As reported by David Grimm in Science in January and May of 2016, the pair are owned by the NIRC, but have been out on loan to Stony Brook University in New York State for use in anatomic research. The case was lost, as were multiple appeals, and ultimately a judge ruled the pair as non-persons in July of 2015. Then, on December 10th, 2015, Stony Brook University returned the pair to the NIRC, complicating the case by changing jurisdictions. The NHRP's campaign continued with petitions and a video appeal by Jane Goodall. And this takes us back to the decision mentioned earlier of New Iberia to release its chimpanzees to a sanctuary. In a press release on the day of the announcement, Wise described the move as, quote, long overdue and as a, quote, significant milestone. The NIRC, for their part, denied that the activists had any role in shaping their decision. And it should be noted that the NIRC has not announced any plans to release any of the 6,000 or so remaining non-chimp primates that it has at its facility. And arguably they have reasons for not doing so. Chimpanzees have been a favorite of medical researchers because they are so very similar to us. And although Dr. Francis Collins, director at the National Institutes of Health, called their use in research largely unnecessary in a press release on June 26, 2013, research, no doubt, will continue, and subjects presumably will have to be found. Another argument against chimpanzee personhood is that in order for an entity to have rights, that entity must be able to bear responsibilities. Arguably, this is a bit of a slippery slope, however, because the capacity of many humans to bear responsibilities is severely limited, and yet few would argue that they should not at least have the rights to bodily liberty and integrity. And on the other hand, one could argue that chimpanzee personhood itself is a slippery slope. Essentially, if we let one non-human animal into the person club, then eventually we'll have to let them all in. And in fact, according to the NHRP on their website, an elephant is next on their agenda. Now, whether that case is as successful as the one with Hercules and Leo appears to have been is an open question, as is the broader question of whether the idea of chimpanzee personhood as espoused by the NHRP will eventually win out over the various counterarguments that have been leveled against them. But the trend towards a greater appreciation of our cousin the chimpanzee does seem apparent, and perhaps considering them in some sense as persons is not all that much of a stretch.